Chains clinked as the human was dragged across the cold floor, his boots leaving faint streaks of blood behind him. The alien guards pushed him forward with their spears, their glowing eyes full of hatred. He stumbled, but did not fall, even though his body was bruised and heavy with exhaustion. The great chamber of judgment loomed ahead, a hall of black stone and silver fire where the alien commander waited on her high throne. Thousands of soldiers stood in ranks on both sides, watching silently as the human was thrown to his knees. The commander rose slowly, her tall figure wrapped in dark armor that gleamed under the torchlight. Her face was stern, her eyes sharp as blades. She looked down at the human like one would look at a piece of dirt. Her voice cut through the silence, cold and merciless. This human has trespassed into our lands. He has killed our scouts. He has defied our law. For this, there is only one punishment: death. The soldiers roared, pounding their weapons against the floor. Some spat in the human's direction. Others shouted for his head to be cut off immediately. The human did not bow, did not beg. He lifted his face, blood running down his cheek, and stared back at the commander with steady eyes. His jaw was tight, but his gaze was fearless. It made some soldiers uneasy, because no human should look at their commander like that. The guards forced him lower, pressing his head to the floor, but he resisted, muscles straining against their hold. The commander raised her hand, and silence fell again. She wanted to watch his spirit break before the end. She stepped closer, her long shadow falling over him. "Do you not fear me, human?" she asked, her voice echoing like thunder. The human coughed, his lips split open, but a faint smile touched them. "Fear?" he whispered, voice rough. "I've faced worse than death." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A fragile creature daring to defy her, daring to speak back in her hall. It was unthinkable. Rage flickered in the commander's eyes, and she clenched her fist. The guards raised their blades high above the prisoner's head, ready to strike. The moment stretched like a blade about to fall. The human closed his eyes, prepared for the end. The crowd leaned forward, waiting to see blood spill across the floor. But then a voice rang out, sharp and young, filled with fire. "Stop!" The sound cut through the chamber like lightning. The guards froze. The commander herself stiffened, her hand in midair. The soldiers looked around, confused, until they saw her. From the side of the throne, a young figure stepped out, her cloak flowing, her face pale but determined. It was the commander's daughter. She walked forward with bold steps, though her hands trembled slightly. Her eyes, bright with defiance, locked onto the human kneeling on the ground. Without hesitation, she moved between him and the raised blades, her small frame standing as a shield against the towering guards. The chamber exploded into whispers and shouts. Soldiers pointed, shocked beyond belief. No one dared to move. The human opened his eyes slowly, stunned to see the girl standing in front of him. Her back was to him, but her voice was strong. "He will not die," she said. The commander's eyes widened, fury flashing across her face. "Daughter," she thundered, "step aside at once." But the girl did not move. She spread her arms slightly, as if to block the blades with her own body. "If he dies," she declared, her voice carrying through the hall, "then I die too." The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to crush the air itself. The guards looked at each other, unsure. The crowd did not know what to do. Obey the commander or protect her heir? The human, still on his knees, could only stare at the strange turn of fate. A moment ago, he was ready to die. Now, the daughter of his enemy was shielding him with her life. The commander's fists clenched, her whole body shaking with anger. But her soldiers did not strike. They waited for her order, frozen between loyalty to their ruler and the life of her daughter. The human felt his heart pound. He didn't know why she was doing this or what it meant, but he understood one thing clearly. Nothing in this hall would ever be the same again. The guards still held their blades high, but their arms trembled with hesitation. No one dared to move while the daughter stood in front of the human. Her dark hair shimmered under the torchlight, her chin lifted with stubborn pride. The chamber, once loud with cheers for blood, now drowned in silence, broken only by the crackle of burning torches. The human looked up at her back, unable to understand why the heir of his enemy would risk everything for him. The commander's voice broke the silence like thunder. "Move, child," she roared, her eyes blazing with fury. You shame me before my warriors. This creature is nothing. He must die. But the daughter stood her ground, her voice calm though her heart raced. You call him nothing, but you do not know the truth. She turned her head, just enough for her mother to see the fire in her eyes. He saved me when none of ours would. Gasps echoed across the hall. Soldiers exchanged looks, confused and curious. Saved her? From what? The commander froze for a heartbeat, caught off guard. Her daughter had never disobeyed her before, never spoken against her orders in public. Her jaw tightened and her hand shook as she gripped the edge of her throne. The human frowned, trying to follow her words. Saved her? When? He barely understood their language, but he caught pieces of her meaning. His confusion deepened. Why would she reveal such a thing in front of her people? The guards glanced at one another, blades still aimed at the human's head, but none of them dared to strike. They were trained to follow orders, but this was different. To kill now meant risking the heir's life, and no soldier wanted to carry that blame. Murmurs rose among the warriors in the back rows, whispers of betrayal, honor, and secrets that none of them understood. The commander's fury grew hotter with every passing moment. Her armor rattled as she marched forward, stopping only a step away from her daughter. She leaned down, her voice low but filled with venom. Step aside, or I will forget that you are my blood. The daughter did not flinch. She stood taller, her small shoulders squared against the weight of the hall. Then forget, she answered softly, but know this. If you kill him, I will fall with him. Her hand reached behind her, touching the human's shoulder. It was not a gesture of love, but of defiance, proof that her words were no bluff. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some shouted that the commander must stay strong and kill the human regardless of her daughter's madness. Others whispered that perhaps the heir knew something they did not. The human felt the warmth of her hand on his shoulder and stared at her in disbelief. She was risking everything, her honor, her place, her life, just to keep him alive. The commander's teeth ground together and her eyes burned like fire. Why? She demanded, her voice shaking the stone walls. Why protect him? Speak before I tear the words from your throat. The daughter turned fully now, facing not only her mother, but the entire hall. Her voice carried across the crowd. Because he is not what you think. He is not weak. He is not a beast. He is the one who carried me when your soldiers abandoned me. Without him, I would be ashes on the wind. A heavy silence swept across the chamber again. The guards lowered their blades slightly, uncertain. Soldiers at the back pushed forward, desperate to hear more. The commander's mouth opened, then closed, her mind racing. She wanted to strike her daughter down for daring to speak such words, but she could not before so many witnesses. The human stared at her, memories flickering at the edges of his mind. Yes, he remembered now. A wounded alien girl in the forest, bleeding and alone. He had carried her across dangerous ground, sharing his food, ignoring the risk of being caught. He never knew who she was. Now he understood. She had been the commander's daughter all along. The girl stepped closer to her mother, lifting her chin higher. If you kill him, you kill your honor. You kill mine. And you kill the truth that not all enemies are monsters. Her words rang out sharp and clear, breaking through the walls of hate that filled the hall. The commander's fists trembled. Her pride screamed at her to order the human's death, to show strength before her soldiers. But her daughter's eyes pierced her like knives. Those same eyes reminded her of the night she almost lost her only child. She could not strike them down, not even for power. The human sat quietly, his chest rising and falling with each rough breath. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. The courage of the daughter had shifted the entire hall. The balance of life and death no longer rested on the commander's command alone. It now balanced on the edge of a daughter's defiance. The soldiers waited, breaths held, eyes wide. Would the commander choose blood, or would she bend to her daughter's will? The hall felt like it would shatter under the weight of silence. The human, still bound and broken, understood only one thing with certainty. This fight was no longer his alone. A storm had begun, and the daughter's voice had become his only shield. The daughter's words hung in the air, and the silence inside the hall felt heavier than stone. The human blinked slowly, trying to piece together what she meant. His mind reached back through foggy memories, through pain and blood, to a night long ago when the world had been nothing but shadows and fire. That night returned to him now, sharp and clear, as if the hall itself had pulled it from his bones. He had been wandering near the border, hunted and starving. His unit had scattered after a surprise attack, and he was alone, trying to stay alive. The forest around him had been quiet, too quiet, until he heard a faint cry. At first, he thought it was a trap. Aliens often use tricks to lure humans into ambushes. But the sound was weak, broken, and it stirred something inside him that fear could not drown. He moved carefully toward it, weapon in hand, heart racing. Beneath a broken tree, half crushed by the fallen trunk, he found her. She was small, her armor cracked, her skin pale from blood loss. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, widened when she saw him. She had tried to lift her weapon, but it slipped from her shaking hands. She was no soldier then, just a gleaning into the soil. He remembered standing over her, weapon ready, thinking how easy it would be to end her life and escape before more of her kind arrived. But he didn't strike. Something in her gaze stopped him. It was not hate, not rage, but fear, the kind of fear he knew too well. He dropped his weapon and pulled the heavy trunk away with his bare hands. His muscles burned, but he managed to lift it just enough for her to crawl free. She collapsed, coughing, and he tore a strip of cloth from his own uniform to press against her wound. She was lighter than he expected when he lifted her, carrying her across uneven ground, ignoring his own hunger and pain. Through the night, he walked, his arms cramping, his body trembling, but he did not let her fall. He shared his last piece of dry bread with her, pressing it into her hand when she refused. She had whispered something in her language, words he could not understand, but the tone was soft, almost grateful. He had placed her near the edge of her people's territory, where patrols would find her, and left without a word. He never looked back. Now, standing in the hall, she told that story to everyone. Her voice rang clear, trembling only at the edges. "It was this human," she said, pointing at the man kneeling behind her. "He could have left me to die, but he carried me when my own soldiers abandoned me. He gave me food when he had none for himself. He saved me." The hall erupted with noise, shouts, disbelief, gasps of shock. Some soldiers laughed, calling it a lie, a trick of the human to win mercy. Others frowned, uneasy, because the fire in the daughter's eyes did not look like a lie. The human stared at her back, remembering every step of that night, the weight of her in his arms, the sound of her weak breathing as he pushed himself to keep going. He had not thought of it again until now. The commander's lips curled into a snarl. She wanted to deny it, to call her daughter a fool, but doubt crept into her mind like poison. Her daughter had vanished once, yes. There had been whispers of a failed patrol, whispers she had silenced. Could it be true that a human had brought her back alive? Her fists clenched, rage and fear mixing in her chest. The human finally spoke, his voice rough but steady. "I didn't know who she was. I only saw someone dying. That was enough." His words were simple, but they carried weight, slicing through the storm of noise. The daughter turned to him, her eyes softening, and for a moment they shared a silence that no one else could enter. She nodded once, confirming his truth. Then she faced the crowd again. "You see him as weak, as worthless," she shouted, her voice rising. "But he is stronger than the cowards who left me to die. He is more honorable than those who serve only fear. If you kill him, you kill the one debt of honor we owe." The chamber shook with the roar of arguments. Some soldiers demanded his death still, claiming one act of mercy could not erase his crimes. Others hesitated, for honor was sacred, and the daughter's words were sharp with truth. The human sat still, his chains heavy on his wrists, but his heart burned as he listened. He had saved her without thought of reward, and now that choice had become the only thing keeping him alive. The commander's eyes narrowed, her rage turning colder, more dangerous. She could feel her control slipping, the crowd dividing, her daughter standing against her. She wanted to crush this story, to erase it, but the memory in her daughter's voice could not be silenced. The girl had spoken of truth, and truth had a way of spreading like fire. The human lowered his head slightly, not in defeat, but in quiet understanding. Fate had twisted their paths together, binding them in a way neither could escape. The night he carried her was no longer just a memory. It was now a weapon sharper than any blade, one that might tear an empire apart. The commander's armor rattled as she turned sharply, her cape whipping behind her. She could no longer face the eyes of her soldiers, not with her daughter's words echoing in the chamber. Rage boiled in her chest, but it was not the kind of rage she could unleash in front of her army. Without another word, she stormed out of the hall, her steps loud, leaving behind confusion and whispers. The guards stayed frozen, unsure whether to follow her or to obey the silent command of her daughter, who still stood between them and the human. In a private chamber behind the throne room, the commander slammed her fist against the table. The metal bent under her strength, but the fire inside her did not calm. Her daughter followed close behind, not afraid, though she knew what waited for her. The door sealed shut, and the silence between them was sharp as knives. "You dare humiliate me before my soldiers?" the commander hissed, stepping forward until she was towering over her child. Her eyes blazed, her fangs clenched. "You stand with the enemy against your own blood?" The daughter's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "I stand for honor. You taught me honor, Mother. You taught me that a life saved must never be forgotten. He saved mine." The commander's hand twitched as if she wanted to strike her, but she stopped herself. She had beaten generals into obedience, crushed rivals under her heel, but this was her daughter, her only heir. And her daughter's eyes held the same fire she once had when she was young, before power and war hardened her heart. "You are blind," the commander growled, turning away. "That creature is nothing more than a tool of war. He would have slit your throat the moment you turned your back." The daughter shook her head. "You weren't there." "He had the chance. I was broken, bleeding, and alone. He carried me when even our warriors fled. He gave me food. He gave me life. If you kill him now, then you kill me too, because without him, I would already be dead." The words cut deep, but the commander refused to show it. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms until blood dripped. "You think your little story will change the laws of our people? They will never accept him. You make me look weak before them." "Maybe strength is not only in killing," the daughter shot back, her voice sharp now. "Maybe real strength is in knowing when not to kill. He is proof that humans are not what we believe. If you destroy him, you destroy the truth." The commander spun around, her face inches from her daughter's, her voice low and dangerous. "Careful, child. You are treading a path that will tear this empire apart. Do you want to be the spark that burns it all?" The daughter did not flinch. She lifted her chin. "If the empire cannot stand the truth, then it deserves to burn." For a long moment, mother and daughter glared at each other, neither breaking. The silence between them was heavier than any weapon. Finally, the commander pulled away, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. She had no answer that would not cut her own flesh. Outside, the chamber was alive with whispers. Soldiers argued among themselves. Some shouted that the human must be executed at once, that mercy was weakness. Others murmured that the heir's words were not lies, and if the human truly saved her, perhaps he deserved something more than death. The hall was splitting in half, loyalty tearing at its seams. The human sat in his chains, silent, listening to every word. He did not understand all their language, but he could feel the shift in the air. For the first time since his capture, he saw cracks in the wall of hate around him. He lowered his head, hiding the flicker of hope in his eyes. The commander finally returned to the great hall, her face cold as stone. The crowd fell into silence at once, waiting for her judgment. Her daughter walked behind her, still defiant, still refusing to leave the human's side. The commander stared down at the prisoner for a long time, her mind a battlefield of rage and memory. She wanted to kill him, to prove her strength, but she could not shake the picture of her daughter lying broken in the dirt, carried back alive only because of this human. At last she spoke, her voice sharp but measured. "This human will not die today." Gasps spread through the hall, shock breaking like thunder. She raised her hand to silence them. "But do not mistake this for mercy. He will live under my watch, a prisoner of the throne. His life is mine to command, and mine to end when I choose." The daughter's shoulders loosened with relief, though her face remained firm. The human lifted his eyes, meeting the commander's glare. He knew he had not escaped death, only delayed it, and that his life now balanced on the blade of her will. Still, It was more than he expected when the day began. The soldiers murmured, some in outrage, some in confusion, but none dared to speak openly against their commander. The hall returned to order, but beneath the silence, new cracks had formed. Cracks in loyalty, in belief, in fear. The daughter stood beside the human, her hand brushing the chains on his arms, and the commander watched with eyes like ice. The human understood one thing clearly as he was dragged away to the dark cells of the fortress. He was not safe, not yet. The commander's mercy was as sharp as her wrath, and he was still walking on the edge of a blade. But he also knew something else. He was no longer alone. The human was dragged into the arena at dawn, his wrists chained, his body still sore from the beatings. The sand beneath his boots was stained with old blood, and the walls around him were filled with the cries of soldiers eager to see death. Thousands of eyes watched from the stone seats that rose high above, their voices a wave of noise that shook the air. Some shouted curses, others laughed, already certain the fight would be short. The commander stood tall on a balcony above, her armor gleaming in the light. Her face was unreadable, but her daughter's was not. The girl leaned over the railing, her hands clenched tight, her eyes locked on the human as if willing him to survive. She had begged her mother through the night not to force this trial, but the commander had been unbending. "If he wants to live," she had said, "let him prove it in blood." The chains were struck from the human's wrists, and a short blade was tossed at his feet. He bent, picked it up, and tested its weight. It was dull, old, and small compared to the curved spears and razor-sharp claws of the warriors he would face. He glanced up at the stands, meeting the gaze of the commander's daughter. For just a moment, their eyes locked, and then the gates at the far end of the arena opened. The first warrior stepped out, huge and armored, his forearms gripping twin axes. He roared, the sound echoing like thunder. The crowd cheered. The human tightened his grip on the blade, his breathing steady. The warrior charged, his heavy feet shaking the ground, but the human did not meet him head-on. Instead, he rolled aside at the last instant, the axe biting into sand where he had been. The human slashed upward, quick and sharp, cutting across the alien's exposed arm. The crowd gasped. It was a small wound, but blood spilled. The warrior roared louder, swinging wildly, but the human ducked and weaved, using speed instead of strength. Every strike he dodged drained the warrior's energy, every miss dragging out the fight. At last, the human darted close, slashing deep across the warrior's leg. The giant stumbled, and the human leapt onto his back, driving the blade to the hilt into the gap in his armor. The warrior collapsed, shaking the ground as he fell still. The crowd went silent, then burst into noise again, but this time not all were jeers. Some voices shouted in shock, others in reluctant approval. The human stood, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arms, but alive. He thought it was over. He was wrong. Another gate opened. 2 warriors stepped out this time, one carrying a long spear, the other with hooked blades that gleamed like teeth. The crowd roared with excitement. The commander's lips curved into the faintest smile, testing how far the human could go. They came at him together, their moves sharp and trained. The spear thrust forward, the blade sliced in from the side. The human barely rolled aside, the spear grazing his shoulder, blood running fresh. He stumbled, but recovered, grabbing a handful of sand and throwing it into the eyes of the one with blades. The alien hissed, blinded for a moment, and the human lunged at the spear holder. He knocked the shaft aside, rushed forward, and drove his blade into the alien's chest before he could recover. The one with the hooks regained sight and screamed in fury, slashing wildly. The human twisted away, but one hook cut across his ribs, hot pain burning through his body. He gritted his teeth, ignoring it, and when the alien lunged again, he sidestepped, using the dead warrior's spear as a shield. The hook stuck in the spear's shaft, and with a roar, the human drove his small blade through the alien's throat. 2 bodies fell. The human staggered back, clutching his bleeding side, his breath ragged. The crowd was no longer laughing. Murmurs spread through them, awe mixing with disbelief. The commander leaned forward slightly, her face tight with something between anger and reluctant respect. Her daughter was already at the edge of tears, whispering prayers for him to hold on. The gates creaked again. A final warrior stepped out, taller and deadlier than all the others. His armor was covered in scars, his weapon a massive hammer that glowed faintly with power. The crowd roared his name. He was their champion, undefeated. The human's legs shook, but he lifted his blade again. His fingers trembled, his body screamed for rest, but his eyes burned with defiance. The champion charged, hammer swinging. The human dove aside, the weapon smashing into the ground with an explosion of sand and stone. The shockwave sent him rolling, ears ringing, body aching. He scrambled to his feet, circling the champion, looking for weakness. The giant swung again, and again the human dodged, each time by the width of a breath. His blade snapped against the champion's armor, too strong to pierce. His strength was fading. The daughter leaned over the rail, her voice breaking free. "You can do this," she shouted, not caring that the whole arena heard. The human heard her too, and it pushed him to keep moving. At last, as the hammer came down, he dropped low, sliding under the giant's legs. He slashed upward with all his remaining strength, cutting through the softer joint of the champion's knee. The giant stumbled, roaring in pain, and the human leapt onto his back, climbing like a desperate beast. The hammer swung wildly, but he clung on, driving his broken blade again and again into the gaps of the armor, until finally the champion collapsed with a shuddering crash. Silence swallowed the arena. The human stood on unsteady legs, covered in blood that was not all his own. He dropped the blade, his chest heaving, his vision swimming. For a moment, he thought he might fall too, but he stayed standing. Then the silence broke. The crowd roared, not with laughter, not with mockery, but with awe. Some shouted his victory, others demanded his freedom. For the first time, respect had sparked in their voices. Above, the commander's face was stone, but her eyes burned with conflict. Her daughter smiled through tears, her heart swelling with pride. The human had survived when no one believed he could. He had faced their best and still lived. In that moment, he was no longer just a prisoner. He was something far more dangerous, an enemy they could no longer call weak. The human was carried back to the fortress after the brutal fight, his body torn with cuts and bruises. His breath was shallow, his skin pale, but his eyes still burned with a strange fire. The alien healers did not rush to help him. They worked slowly, almost with disdain, treating him as though he was not worth their effort. They wrapped his wounds and poured bitter liquid down his throat, enough to keep him alive, but not enough to take away the pain. When the healers left, the cell was dim and quiet. The human lay on the stone bed, his chest rising and falling heavily. He closed his eyes, certain he would not wake again. But then he heard soft footsteps, lighter than the boots of guards. He forced his eyes open and saw her, the commander's daughter, slipping into the room. She had covered herself in a cloak, her face shadowed, but her voice betrayed her. "You fought like no one I have ever seen," she whispered, moving to his side. Even my people could not believe it. The human tried to laugh, but the sound turned into a cough. "Fought because I had no choice," he said weakly. "Survive or die. That's all." She sat beside him, her hand hovering over his bandaged side. Her eyes softened, filled with something between sorrow and admiration. "You should not have survived," she said. "Yet you did. You stood against warriors that even our best fear." His gaze met hers, tired but steady. "I didn't fight for them." "I didn't," he murmured. "I fought because you believed I could." The words struck her like a blade. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she could not speak. She had watched him in the arena, every strike, every stumble, every desperate move. She had whispered prayers she had never believed in before, just to see him rise again. And he had. Rumors were already spreading through the fortress. The guards whispered in corners. Soldiers argued in shadows. Some said the human was a beast in disguise, others that he was chosen by fate. Many muttered about the bond forming between the heir and the human. It was dangerous talk, the kind that could shake the foundation of the empire. The commander herself had noticed. She had seen her daughter's tears during the battle, seen the way her eyes had followed the human as though he was something more than a prisoner. The commander's anger grew sharper with every whisper she overheard. But even she could not deny what her soldiers had witnessed. The human had done the impossible. He had earned a strange kind of respect. The daughter reached out now, her fingers brushing the edge of his chain. Her touch was light, almost fearful, as if she knew that to be caught would mean disgrace. "You are more honorable than my people." she whispered. "You gave me life when they abandoned me. And now you fight with a strength none of them understand." The human closed his eyes again, letting out a slow breath. "Honor doesn't matter. I only did what I thought was right." Her hand tightened around the chain, her voice trembling. "No, it matters. It matters more than you know. If you die, then everything I said, everything I stood for becomes a lie. I cannot let that happen." At that moment, the door burst open. The commander stood there, her shadow filling the cell. Her eyes burned as they landed on her daughter by the human's side. The room turned colder. "So it is true," the commander hissed. "You come to him like a thief in the night. My own blood shames me with this weakness." The daughter rose quickly, her cloak falling back, but she did not retreat. She faced her mother with a steady gaze. "It is not weakness to honor life. It is not weakness to protect what is right." The commander's fists clenched, her voice rising like a storm. "He is an enemy. He is a threat. And you, my heir, cling to him like a fool." The daughter's reply came fast, her voice ringing with defiance. "If he dies, then our honor dies with him. If he dies, so do I." The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. The human, still weak on the bed, opened his eyes and looked between them. The commander's rage was clear, but so was her hesitation. To kill the human now would mean killing her daughter's spirit. To allow him to live meant risking rebellion among her own people. The daughter stood tall, her hand still on the human's chain, her eyes unflinching. "You may be commander of this empire, but you are not commander of my heart. I will not turn from him. Not now. Not ever." The commander glared at her, her face twisted with fury, but deep inside, something wavered. The fire in her daughter's eyes was the same fire she once had before years of war hardened her. She hated it, but she also recognized it. Without another word, the commander turned sharply, her cape snapping behind her as she stormed out. The guards outside stepped aside quickly, too afraid to meet her gaze. The daughter let out a trembling breath and sat back beside the human. For a long moment, they said nothing, the silence filled only by his shallow breaths. At last, he whispered, "You risk everything. For me. Why?" She looked at him, her eyes soft but fierce. "Because sometimes one life changes everything, and maybe you are that life." The human stared at her, too tired to answer, but her words sank into him like a seed waiting to grow. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since his capture, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. The fortress was restless. Whispers ran through the halls like fire through dry grass. Many soldiers were furious that the human still lived, furious that their commander had bent even a little under her daughter's defiance. Others were uneasy, shaken by what they had seen in the arena. A human had stood against their champions and survived. Respect and fear mixed in their voices, and for the first time, doubt had entered their hearts about the old laws. In the commander's war council, the air was tense. Generals pounded their fists on the table, demanding blood. "He must die now," one snarled, "before his existence divides us further. Already the soldiers whisper of him. Already they look to the air with questioning eyes." Another added, "If you do not strike, Commander, you will look weak, and weakness invites rebellion." The commander listened in silence, her jaw tight. Her told her they were right. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter standing in the arena stands, screaming for the human to rise. She saw her daughter shielding him in the judgment hall. Her daughter's loyalty was no longer with her. It was with him. That night, as the fortress lay under the blanket of silence, shadows moved through the halls. A group of soldiers, loyal to the rival generals, slipped into the human cell. Their orders were simple: kill him and end this scandal before it destroyed the empire. The human woke to the sound of steel drawn from scabbards. His wounds were still raw, his body weak, but instinct forced him upright. The assassins entered, their blades gleaming, their eyes full of hate. "The empire will not bow to a human," one spat before raising his weapon. The strike never landed. The door burst open, and the commander's daughter stood there, her own blade drawn. Her cloak whipped around her as she shouted, "Touch him, and you will answer to me." The assassins hesitated for only a moment before rushing forward. The human grabbed a broken piece of chain from the floor, swinging it with desperate strength. He knocked one blade aside, the chain wrapping around the assassin's arm, and with a pull, sent him crashing into the wall. The daughter moved like fire, her strike sharp, fueled not by strength but by determination. Side by side, human and air fought in the dark cell, defending each other against trained killers. Blood splattered across the stone floor. The human took a cut to his shoulder but struck back, using his small size and speed against the heavier soldiers. The daughter was nearly cornered when one assassin raised his blade high, but the human threw himself forward, blocking the strike with his chain. Pain shot through his body, but he forced the blade away, giving her the opening she needed to finish her attacker. When the last assassin fell, the cell was silent except for the sound of their heavy breathing. The human leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, his wounds burning, but he was alive. The daughter knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his bleeding arm. "You protected me again," she whispered, her voice breaking. Before he could answer, the commander appeared in the doorway, her face shadowed by torchlight. She looked at the bodies on the floor, then at her daughter clutching the human's arm. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, the commander stepped inside, her presence filling the room. The soldiers who survived the attack bowed their heads, waiting for her fury. But it did not come. Instead, she looked at her daughter and something shifted in her eyes. Anger, yes, but also pride. She turned her gaze to the human, bloodied but unbroken, and in that moment, she saw what her daughter had seen all along. This was not weakness. This was strength. She raised her voice, and it carried through the halls like a battle cry. "Hear me. This human is under my protection. Any who raise a hand against him, raise it against me." The words echoed across the fortress. Soldiers froze, stunned, as the declaration spread. Some shouted in outrage, others bowed in respect, but the decision had been made. The human was no longer just a prisoner. He was bound to the commander's throne by her own words. The daughter lowered her head, relief flooding her chest, tears burning her eyes. The human sat back against the wall, his vision swimming, but his heart steady. Against all odds, he had survived again, not because of his strength alone, but because he and the daughter had shielded each other. From that night onward, nothing in the empire was the same. The human's survival became a symbol, a story whispered in every corner. To some, he was a danger, proof that humans were more than weak prey. To others, he was hope, a spark of change. The commander watched her soldiers with sharp eyes, knowing her choice would shape the future. She did not smile, but deep inside, she knew her daughter had forced her to see what she had long forgotten, that strength was not just in power, but in courage. The human, chained but alive, understood one truth as he met the daughter's gaze. He had stepped into a world where he was meant to die, but now, because of her defiance and his will to fight, he had become something greater. He was no longer a condemned prisoner. He was a turning point in a galaxy that would never be the same again.